Hi, welcome back. And this video then is about how to put that quilt zip, that you've zipped on the zipper, your quilt top, your batting, how to get it on our frame. So first thing I'm gonna say is super helpful if you already, again, have your quilt top and your backing folded again on that midline, so it's all ready to go, and have right sides out. And that just helps you get onto the frame a lot easier and faster without having to finagle it on. So the frame bars, you have 2 leaders that that have the zippers on that your quilt back is going to go on. So this is the take up bar, and it has the top leader, and because it takes up the quilt as you sew. This is called a dead bar, and the only reason for this is to help maintain a level like work surface. Your quilt will stay level because this dead bar is level with this bar, which is the back bar. Even though it's in front, the entire quilt back goes on this bar before you start quilting. So that's why it's called the back bar. So there's more than one way to put a quilt on the frame for the most part, like especially, do you start with the front? Do you start with the back of the frame? It's totally fine to find what works best for you. So I'm just gonna show you the way I do it and why I do it the way I do it. So I like to start with the top of the quilt back onto the top of the take-up leader. So I've got my quilt back here, and that's the bottom. I know that's the bottom because it has the zipper pulls on it. This one doesn't have zipper pulls on it, so it's the top of my quilt back. Also, the zipper itself will say top left side. For if you have a directional quilt back, again, you'll want to pay attention to that. So I got my quilt here. This is my midline of my quilt, which will match up to the midline of my frame. So that's why it's important to keep this fold here. Just makes it life easier. And then I open up my quilt back that way. Careful not to step on your quilt while you're working. And grab this zipper end. This zipper pull goes in and goes. It'll be obvious if you've got if you unfolded it wrong, it won't go in. So just like any zipper, and just all the way down to the very end. You do not leave this hanging off because, as you can see, the quilt machine may run into it and get tangled in it, so it should be all the way to the end. Now I'm grabbing the quilt back and just kind of straightening it out here. Again, not stepping on my quilt bottom. And I start rolling it up. If you're having trouble rolling it up, it probably means the latchet is locked. So it should be relatively easy. I'm pretty short, so this is a bit of a stretch for me, but, and as I'm rolling it up, I want to try to catch the threads that I don't want in there. Any big ripples that start to form, I start to smooth out. This is a very stable back, so there's not a whole lot of adjustment needed, but if you've got a back that's been pieced, there can be a lot of ripples that you kind of want to just smooth out a little bit as you can. Again, I wouldn't stress too much at this point just because we haven't even zipped up the bottom yet, but it helps make the next part easier. So now we're at the bottom of our quilt back. Here is the quilt leader. So the important thing is to zip it up with everything in between the bars. I find it easier. If you zip it out here, you might actually twist the zipper. And again, it'll be really obvious, but to make life easier, everything should be in the middle of the quilt frame. This has the pull now, goes in. It matches up to the zipper there. Move all the way along. So even though that fuzz is in the zipper kind of area, it just naturally kind of pulls away. So I've never had it get caught before. I have stray threads. So to unlock and lock our ratchet system here, right now it's unlocked. And I just kind of wiggled it until the pins got it into the locked position. To unlock it, you push, and you can see the pins there, and now it will stay unlocked because it's perpendicular to the grooves that those pins go into. So to lock it, I just turn it until those pins go into the hole, push and turn so the pins are out of their holes to stay unlocked. So again, this will move in one direction. Even though it's locked, it won't move in the other direction. So it prevents your quilt from sagging when you're quilting. So we want it unlocked as we load up the quilt now. So our quilt then needs to be, the quilt back needs to be all on the back bar when we start quilting. So I start to roll it up. And I like to let the tension naturally, smooth out all the ripples. For some people, this is physically hard because, you're working against that piece. So sometimes you might need to loosen this up, a little bit and then work it a little bit more here. See, it's getting a little hard here, so I'll loosen it up a little and then straighten it up. I want to make sure my center fold isn't creating a tent here. That's what can happen, is you'll get like a little tent here. We want it all nice and flat. When you have a seam like this, I kind of like to, a lot of times there'll be ripples at a seam, and so I like to go through and make sure it's all going to face one way, and then I tuck it, that seam in as I go. Because you won't be able to see that seam very easily as you're quilting. So now it's tucked in, it'll come out okay. And that's pretty much it. This was really simple. Sometimes when there's a lot of ripples, I'm turning and then smoothing. Turning and smoothing. Like, it takes a lot longer because you have to smooth so much more. But if you take that time, you'll have less chance of a pin tuck in the back as you're sewing. If this isn't nice and smooth, you'll get the fabric in the back get tucked in and get gathers in the back, so you want to prevent that. All right, so now we have our quilt back on the frame. Before I forget, I do need to lock it, because remember, if I don't, this is going to happen when I put my quilt on it. It's just going to get sagging because it's not locked in position yet. So what I like to do is I like to stop what for me is my comfort zone to quilt in. I'm, again, short armed, so in general, I just kind of go as long as my arm goes. Some, people go a little further, some people go a lot shorter because their comfort zone for sewing is a certain range. So I go this far. So this is where I'm gonna be. Then I go over here and I lock the frame, wiggle it until it goes back in its, back in its spot. And so now I know nothing's gonna move on me when I put the rest of the quilt on the frame. And yeah, so next is the quilt batting. To put that on, we have to, since the batting's coming off the roll, like I didn't fold it with the midline, you can, but also, you know, an easy trick is just to make your batting the same width as your quilt back. So you know that, you know, the edge of your batting has to be flushed with the edge of your quilt back. So let's say I just did a rough put on. Remember, this is a cut edge, so this is one reason why, you know, you might want to kind of take a look here and see where your quilt is. I feel like my sides are straight, so I'm pretty sure this cut is just a little angled from human error. So I would normally then lift this up and make sure more of that quilt batting is covering my quilt back. So that's what I would do. Also, because sometimes the edges of your quilt back are ripply and you don't want that in your actual quilt. You want a nice finish. So my quilt back, I'm comfortable with what that looks like. I like it. I'm gonna then tuck in the bottom of it in our basket here, so I don't have to worry so much about stepping on it. And the biggest thing you need to make sure is you're not gonna sew on the zipper. So because it's covered, sometimes I see people covering it so much that you really can't see where the zipper is. When it's covered, sometimes it's helpful to just put a pin like kind of where you want the quilt top to be and say, I want a good 3 inch, so I want my quilt top to be about there. And then I grab my quilt top, which I had folded with midline in the middle. So from the quilt top, I do start in the middle, and I put my thumb there. And then, because I got that pin there, it's kind of handy to also then move the pin and put it back in with the quilt top. So I can work the rest of the quilt top without having worrying about I've lost my middle. So what I tend to do is kind of straighten up the middle a little bit and then go to the edge. And I use air to my advantage. It's a light touch, you don't need to so what I'm doing is just kind of trying to see if visually it looks straight. I mean, nobody's piecing perfect, and piecing is gonna look, so it's more of just a visual check. And that, like for me right now, I feel like this side looks really nice and straight, but I feel like this side of the quilt might be shifting a little. So I'm gonna lift up this corner up and just lift up the whole quilt up onto the back a little bit more. And so that might mean I have a ripple here, but we can adjust that. There. The other thing I kind of look at if I have a pretty straight quilt is that does it look like it's hanging straight down to the ground. In this case, you know, it actually just brushes the ground, so that's another way to kind of like, oh yeah, there's, you know, it looks visually pretty straight, and I'm pretty happy with that. And so I go and tuck in the quilt top into the basket as well, so I don't have to worry about stepping on it. And we're pretty much ready to go.